topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is marketing and brand compliance. And we'd like to invite to the podium Shayda Torabi.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm here. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yay.
Yes.
Thank you, Shayda.
Thank you.
Pleasure to join us. Woohoo!
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, you are the host of the show To Be Blunt. So thank you for joining us and for giving us a little bit of insight into your sector of the market. You do quite a lot. You're an award winner. And where are you joining us from?
I am based in Austin, Texas, my hometown. And so that's where I'm giving this presentation from. So if anybody is familiar with Texas, we are not fully recreationally legal. We have a very tiny medical marijuana program, but we have a very exciting CBD and hemp market. And I spend a lot of my time both here in Texas managing my CBD dispensary called Restart CBD, as well as operating, as you highlighted, Denise, a cannabis marketing podcast called To Be Blunt. So I have a lot of conversations at a national level as well. Should I dive in?
Thank you. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Can y'all see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So again, hello everybody. My name is Shayda Torabi, and today we're going to be talking about marketing and brand compliance. So hopefully marketing is supposed to be fun. There's a lot of creative aspects that go into marketing, but obviously with cannabis, with the legality, with the regulations, there's obviously a lot of red tape and things that we should be mindful of. And that's where compliance comes in. So I'm going to dive into this presentation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I've included all my social handles. So if you have something that resonated with you, or you want to just shoot me a DM or go check out more content, feel free to reach out on social media. I'm at the Shayda Torabi. So if you know my name, which is right here, you'll be able to find me pretty easily. So this is me. I am the co-founder and CEO of Restart CBD. We are a women-owned, sister-owned, family-run CBD dispensary here in Austin, Texas. We were the first to open up shop 3 years ago when kind of nationally CBD was becoming legal, and then Texas became legal shortly after that. So we operate a dispensary model as well as an e-commerce platform. So I always like to just highlight kind of who I am, obviously for reference of just credibility, but also to kind of give you guys a foundation for where I'm coming from with some of my insights. But again, just kind of reflecting on being a podcast host of To Be Blunt Pod, I do have a pretty good understanding of cannabis at a national, federal level as well. And so some of those insights will be incorporated absolutely into this conversation, because I'm sure some of you are like, I'm in a legal state, I'm operating a dispensary, or maybe you are wanting to have a hemp or CBD brand. And so you're looking for, just different ways that you can work around some of these different regulations that are happening. And then kind of the final piece is I'm a content creator. I have over 20,000 Instagram followers, and I built a personal brand, which is me, Shayda Torabi. And I leverage all of these to ultimately help market and brand my business Restart, as well as the projects I'm involved in the cannabis space. So I really want to kick the discussion off because hemp versus marijuana is very different. Not only are there variations in the plant, but there's also variations when it comes to what you can transact. So like I mentioned, I'm dealing with e-commerce because hemp is federally legal. I can sell online. Now with COVID, I know that there's definitely some more advances in technology. I know there's certain platforms that now you can make sales from, maybe a portal to shop a dispensary and then be able to go pick up those items at the dispensary. So there's definitely nuances depending on what aspect of the industry you're playing in. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight that for everybody listening in and tuning in, just to kind of think through, reminder, whatever I'm saying, you're going to have to apply it back to what you're trying to do, what your business is in the state that you live in. And so if you don't have a good understanding of what your state's cannabis laws are, that would be a great side note for you to take, just to go get more invested into what's happening in your state. Or should you be wanting to explore into another state, because it is not federally legal from a marijuana perspective, every state operates differently. And even hemp being federally legal, there are still variations from state to state. So again, just kind of something to keep in mind as we go through this journey. So The types of advertising allowed depend primarily on your location. So again, just kind of an emphasis, depending on where you're living and depending on what type of activities you're wanting to do, those might change. So we're going to get into product labels and social media advertising. And there's so many nuances. Like in Texas, there are certain things that our product labels have to say versus if I was selling, for example, in Florida or Oklahoma. And so everything that I'm sharing is kind of like a high level, FYI of things that you should be conscious and considerate when trying to market and brand in pertinence to being compliant. But ultimately, you got to check your local rules. That's kind of the first key thing that I think so many brands don't really consider. And so they might take, a fact or hear an article or something that happens kind of at a federal level or from another state, and it just might not even actually apply to you in your state. So the things that we're going to highlight today are your website, social media, advertising, and product labels. To me, these are kind of the four big pillars as a brand marketer in the cannabis space. These are, if you think about it, your real estate. This is where you are going to be communicating your brand value. And so these are the things that I really think are really important for brand marketers to be conscious of when navigating what should or shouldn't be compliant. So for me, your website is the number one piece of real estate that you own. Your website is your space to brand, market, and sell. And so whether again you are e-commerce operating in hemp or you are a marijuana business, owning your website is kind of the first piece in that puzzle. And so being able to make sure that your website is kind of all those checks and balances are checked off is really important. And so some of those things that you need to keep in mind for compliance, again, making sure that you are registered by your state to actually have an operating license. I know if you're in a legal marijuana state, for example, those regulations are a little bit more stringent versus, for example, here in Texas, we've been federally legal for 3 years, but we've been state legal for about 2 years now, and they just issued licenses a year ago. So we operated for a year without actually having to have a license, and it wasn't anything that we could do. There just wasn't a regulation for it. But now that there's a regulation for it, if you want to operate and be in compliant with the state of Texas, you need to go get your license and therefore have your license number. And those need to be included in both your website, your products, and things like that. Another key piece, contact information, just making sure that, not only can consumers understand how to contact and get a hold of you, but also from a regulatory perspective. I find so many times, people are just selling products to sell products. And so on one hand, I think it's fair to highlight, because cannabis and hemp more in particular are so unregulated, I think that people can just kind of spin up a website and they can just put products online and just sell to consumers. That to me is a big red flag. If I see a brand that doesn't have contact information or any of these key pieces of information that gives me confidence as a consumer, I don't personally want to do business with that brand. So I'm hoping everybody tuning in from a compliance perspective is because you want to be a good steward of this plant and you want to be operating in compliance. So to me, again, having accessible contact information, I always kind of live by the rule, people do business with people, people don't do business with businesses. And so obviously, Target and Walmart, they exist, they're major corporations, but I do think that from a cannabis perspective, people appreciate having accessibility to these brands. And so just highlighting that information already disarms, the consumer and even the government from a compliance perspective, just to know like, hey, I'm dealing with real people. And so for us, we are a women-owned, family-owned brand. And so we incorporate that into our marketing to help establish and firm how serious we are about wanting to remain compliant and wanting to remain a good steward of this plant. The next piece is a certificate of analysis, also called COAs, also could be called lab results, test results. These are required, again, by our state for us to have on our website. Even when you're getting into working with a payment merchant or payment processor, they're going to ask for you to have COAs present on your website. And so some of these things are going to be asked of you, and some of these things are good for you just to do before someone asks you about it. So again, for us, nobody really a year ago was requiring that we displayed our COAs on our website, but it was a best practice for us to be doing that. And then now that Texas actually issued licenses, now it is a requirement that I need to have for me to be compliant, let alone give customers that confidence. Another piece, medical claims, health and safety warnings. Again, those are kind of varying things depending on what state you live in, but kind of at a high level, the notice is you can't make medical claims. You can't say that this cures anything. You can't say this is good for this or good for that. That's kind of across the board in cannabis in general. And so if you've been paying attention to some of the FDA warnings that have been coming down specifically to hemp businesses, you'll notice that they're getting dinged because they're making medical claims on their website. This tincture is going to give you, really good night's sleep. There's definitely certain semantics and ways that you can go around speaking about it. Like you can say this can help with rest, but you can't really say this can help with sleep. And so just being mindful of what those medical claims are, whether you think you're a small brand and they're only looking at big brands, I guarantee you the internet is the internet and there are things crawling all the time. And so we actually, one of the latest FDA warnings went out to a small local business here in Texas. And so it's not escaping anybody. And especially if you want to have a public facing brand and you want to sell to consumers, you should absolutely be conscious of what are these things that you are communicating. It's both a benefit and a curse, because on one end you want to be highlighting all these things on your website, but at the other hand you don't want to get caught saying the wrong thing, so I need to be mindful of those. And then the last thing I highlighted is just age verification. It's something that, again, I'm not seeing being a requirement per se to be compliant with anything, but I'm seeing more and more brands, just because cannabis consumption is really, especially in legal, medical, and marijuana states, you're seeing obviously 21 and older to purchase. In hemp, there really aren't specific regulations around age verification, but I'm seeing it as a best practice of cannabis brands and businesses. So for example, if you go to my website right now, I do not have an age verification. I am working on getting an age verification, but I'm highlighting it as that's not something that I need right now to be compliant. It's not being asked of me in my state. However, I'm going to go ahead and implement it as a good practice, as a good steward of being able to try to continue to be as compliant as possible in this industry. The next key piece I want to highlight is social media. I feel like this is kind of like the meatiest part of everything. This is where everybody, I think, gets hung up when it comes to compliance, because again, I think that we all have good altruistic beliefs when it comes to cannabis and wanting to help people find plant-based medicine. But I do think that we're all business owners and we all want to make a profit at the end of the day. We all want to be successful businesses. And so advertising and being on social media, whether it's just having a social media presence or you're actually trying to make sales off of your social media and advertise, I think are conversations that I'm constantly having, because the shtick of it is you got to enter at your own risk. There is not, unfortunately, a clear path forward. Basically, every platform kind of has their stance for what is compliant and what is not compliant. I took some high level kind of snippets from some of the different platforms that should be most familiar to you if you are playing on social media. I'm just going to kind of highlight some of them for y'all right now. So Instagram says buying or selling illegal or prescription drugs, even if it's allowed and legal in your region, is not allowed. So if you can imagine, I sell hemp, but hemp looks like marijuana. And just because hemp is federally legal and marijuana is not in every state, there's obviously some weird gray area. And so Instagram just takes the stance that anything that is cannabis related is not good for the platform. I'm sure you've heard of people who are getting their accounts turned off because they've created cannabis content, people who are losing their profiles, people who have spent years building up their follower account only to have their account be removed. And that is not something that, again, there's like a clear, well, it's because you posted this piece of content or it's because you said this or that thing. It's really kind of super broad. And so on the next slide, I will go into some specific things that you can be mindful of. But the unfortunate reality is I have tried to remain as compliant as possible on my social media platforms, but I've still been flagged by Instagram for posting inappropriate or violating content. And that's just kind of the nature of it. So Google is very similar. Obviously, all these platforms have some sort of regulation against cannabis, but you obviously also see a lot of cannabis brands and businesses on these social media platforms. So it's like, how do they get away with it? Well, that's just it. They're kind of getting away with it. It's not why does she win and he loses? It's they both could lose, but maybe they just happen to see his content versus her content. And so it really is not I say enter at your own risk because it really is required of you to be okay with losing everything. Again, I've built a personal brand both for myself and for my business. So I'm not really I'm more bullish than maybe somebody who is like a newer brand who is maybe wanting to work with an agency to go create that content for them. They might be a little bit more cautious. What kind of content should we create? How should we navigate that? Whereas I'm a little bit like, let's just, rip the Band-Aid off and see what gets kicked off and see what sticks. So I definitely think you have the opportunity to do that. Just enter at your own risk. So Google, similarly, you can see their wording. It includes cannabis and products or services marketed as facilitating recreational drug use, or ads for instructional content about producing, purchasing, or using recreational drugs. Facebook says they will not allow content that shows the use or sale of recreational drugs. This also includes companies that strictly sell CBD and CBD related products. So again, this wording is coming directly from them. And as we just highlighted, CBD is federally legal. Why are we having the same rules as Facebook? One thing to highlight and to differentiate kind of between social media and your website, again, social media is a closed platform. What that means is you don't own that content. Facebook owns your content. Google owns your content. YouTube owns your content. They're great for spreading awareness for your brand, again, for like helping create educational content and things like that, but it's at your own risk. Versus the website that you own, especially if you're on a platform like WordPress, which is a platform that I built my website on. WordPress is open source. Open source means nobody owns it. The owner of the content owns it. And so anything that I put on my website is stuff that I own, versus anything that I put on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram. It's really fair game for them to pull from the platform should they not like what you're producing. YouTube says while it maintains that it allows educational content, it prohibits channels from linking to sites that sell cannabis. If you can't tell, I think one of the biggest strains is trying to sell cannabis. And so again, on the next slide, I'll kind of highlight what some of those other things are. But TikTok's another big one. They are owned by the Chinese government. And so China is a little bit more conservative than perhaps America is in that regard. And so TikTok is unfortunately pulling a lot of cannabis content. In fact, I have a friend who had over 1 million followers on TikTok. She was selling cannabis greeting cards. So she wasn't even selling products that touch the cannabis plant. She was selling greeting cards and making cannabis related TikTok content. Had been super successful for her. Her reels and her TikToks were very funny. And then last week I heard that TikTok pulled her off the platform. And so sometimes you can petition back to these platforms and kind of be like, hey, why was my content pulled off? I'm selling something legal or something that is not, intended to promote drugs or illicit drugs or things like that. But again, because it's a closed platform, it is ultimately that company's decision whether they want to allow your content to exist on its platform or not. So these are some of those rules, best practices for digital cannabis ad compliance. So it seems like a lot of red tape. It kind of is if you can think of how great advertising on social media is for like a small retail company. Like, great, you make clothes, you want to sell your clothes. There's all these cool integration buttons that allow you to post a picture of yourself in an Instagram post and have a direct link to Instagram shop that shirt right from your screen. Unfortunately, cannabis doesn't get the same luxury, even though most of us are operating legal, whether we're in a legal medicinal or recreation state or operating federally legal under the hemp law. And so these are just kind of things that you need to keep in mind if you want to remain compliant and want to remain in good standing. So don't publish anything that references your prices. Don't publish anything that references a sale, a discount, and so on. Don't publish anything that says you offer any type of cannabis product or service for sale. So really just avoid like dollar signs, avoid attributing monetary value to any product that you're putting on these social media platforms. Don't publish a product menu. You can't publish links to your products, your store located, anything that would assume for a consumer to want to be able to go drive to sell with you or for you to sell to them. Those are off limits. And again, the caveat is, feel free to do these things. Like, feel free to post prices. Feel free to post sales. Just know that the hammer could hit on you and you could have your content removed. So again, it's something that you might observe if you go check out my store's Instagram, Restart CBD. We have specials and sales all the time. I'm always highlighting products in my store because I'm a marketer. That's a channel I want to leverage to help educate and market my products. But have I had products and stories and reels flagged? Absolutely. And so it might get to a point where I get 3 slaps on the wrist at Instagram and then they shut my account down. I personally haven't had my account shut down, but again, it's just an FYI of this is kind of what they're saying you should follow. feel free to follow it to be as most compliant as possible, but also just know that you can be a little bit more, you know, playful with it if you don't mind getting cut off. Don't publish images of cannabis products, or cannabis paraphernalia. Definitely no suggestion of health or medical benefits, and no elements that could appeal to children, so cartoon characters. So ads, I think, are opening up in the cannabis space with some of these platforms. I'm certainly seeing people advertise on Instagram. You're seeing people where they're not saying CBD, they're saying like a wellness tincture, or they're not saying, CBD helps with inflammation. They're being like, I use this after sports recovery. It's very like abstract. So again, I'm seeing people do it and they're getting away with it and they are being compliant with these platforms, but it's a little bit of, you just dance around it. It depends on how much time you have, how much money you have, and how much resources you want to spend kind of testing these platforms out. So this is kind of to sum it up. One account may get away with publishing posts that blatantly violate the guidelines, while others are deleted for simply pushing the edge of those boundaries the tiniest bit. This applies to both plant touching and non-plant touching businesses. So again, I shared the story of my friend with her cannabis greeting card business. I often sometimes reflect on owning a dispensary. So I sell like, pre-rolled joints. I sell flour. I sell oil. Those are products that are plant touching, versus my friend, she sells greeting cards. There's nothing cannabis related other than the graphics on her cards, and unfortunately it doesn't really matter what you're selling. These platforms kind of lump it all the same, and it's really your discretion how you want to navigate forward and ultimately be successful on these platforms. So there are some successes when it comes to advertising. I like to call them kind of like, guerrilla marketing, or just kind of like more local marketing efforts. And these are opening up more and more as the industry kind of continues to evolve. But influencers are a great way for you to leverage social media. Again, it's not that the influencer can get away with posting that content and you can't. It just creates a barrier that it's not coming from a cannabis specific account. So for example, you might have a local health and wellness influencer in your demographic geographical area, and they might be a really big fan of your CBD edibles. So working with them to promote your edibles for sale or for educational purposes might be a better avenue for you than you posting directly on your own platform. There's also the opportunity for local events. Here in Austin, we sponsor and participate in local events all the time. There's not really a lot of compliance regulation around those things. It's really just event to event. So I encourage you to get creative, kind of get into different niches. So we are here in Austin. Austin is live music capital of the world, and music and cannabis go pretty hand in hand. So we'll sponsor concerts or music related events as just another way to get our brand out there that doesn't require us to have to kind of deal with some of these red tape areas that are kind of squeezing the industry right now when it comes to advertising and being compliant on social media platforms. You can produce useful native content to educate and inform your audience on your website. Your website, again, you own the content. As long as you're on an open source platform website, it's a safe space for you to put as much information as you want on there. Just be careful, don't make medical claims. That's kind of, the big deal with that. Podcasting has little to no regulations against cannabis. I run a cannabis marketing podcast, To Be Blunt Pod, and we have no problems. I've never had any challenge for both what I say on the podcast, to what I can sponsor on the podcast, to what I can produce, and how I can kind of promote that. So if you're a brand who's looking for ways to market that might be a little bit more compliant and you don't have to worry so much, you can sponsor podcasts. You can be guests on podcasts. Those are great marketing activities for you to extend your brand and not worry about the compliance part. And I'm seeing radio stations, print magazines, and local publications open up more and more. So you're able to leverage these publications and radio stations. Again, it's probably a little bit more niche because it might be local publications or local radio stations, but they don't have as strict compliance regulations as perhaps being on social media, which obviously social media is great if you want to get to the masses. But because the way that cannabis is kind of operating right now, it's definitely like a local first approach. And so I'm leaning into more of these local advertising opportunities than trying to go do something at a national scale on a social media platform. And then the last thing I'm highlighting, AdSuite.io just got launched. It's actually a digital advertising platform for the cannabis industry. It was built by Enlighten, which is a huge cannabis technology platform that operates in a bunch of different dispensaries. And I just encourage you to go check it out. It is a resource, and you can actually manage it yourself versus having to go hire someone to manage your ads. Now it's new. I personally haven't played with it, but I just read the press release on this. And so I wanted to highlight it for you that should you want to play with digital ads, there are platforms that will allow you to be operating and compliant and can extend your brand and marketing that way. The last kind of piece I want to highlight is product labels. So there's definitely state and federal regulations to be mindful of. I know that if you're operating in the medical marijuana market or the recreational marijuana market, there are very specific regulations on what your labels say. So again, I encourage you to go to your specific state's laws pertaining to cannabis and look at what it's actually asking you. But these are some high level things that I'm highlighting for y'all just to be mindful of. The more information, the better. I'm observing, again, especially reflecting on so many brands are just popping up and there's not a lot of information on them. And I ultimately feel like the consumer is the one who loses out the most. So being able to be, again, a good steward of this plant, show that you are trying to be compliant, showing that you are trying to participate with these laws and regulations as much as possible is ultimately, in my opinion, going to net you the best level of success. So name, quantity of contents, nutrition information, ingredient list. Those are kind of like staples that I believe every label and product should have. But other things to highlight, so specifically here in Texas, we have to include our manufacturer, packer, or distributor. So we have to include some of those like chain of custody information for us to be compliant with the state of Texas because we are a license holder. So again, if you are a license holder, there is absolutely documentation that associates that license that tells you exactly what you need to be to stay compliant. I encourage you to go look into that information. If you are a multi-state operator, be mindful of what's happening at a multi-state level. A hot topic right now is Delta 8 THC. Delta 8 THC is not necessarily federally legal. It operates in a very gray area. It's not even state to state legal, but there are some states that have actually come out and made it illegal. So for example, right now in Texas, it's quote unquote, legal and accessible for us to be selling. But Idaho, for example, it is not legal. And so I would not be in compliance if I sent my Delta 8 products to Idaho. And so you need to be mindful if you are shipping across state lines, what every state's regulations and requirements are to ultimately be in compliance with them. FDA warnings. And then the last one, of course, is just a QR code to the COA. I think COAs are tricky just because it's something that the industry is told that we need, but there's not a lot of, understanding around it. But ultimately, it gives that confidence back to the consumer. It gives the confidence to the regulators. It's helping connect the dots back to making sure that you're selling a product with integrity, a product that actually says what it is. And so again, if I'm shopping around and I don't see brands that have these pieces, which in my opinion are very like low hanging fruit things that should be on every piece of product, website, platform that you're operating on, then you're ultimately, in my opinion, having a miss, because I think those are just kind of things that people are expecting now when they're dealing business with brands. They want to make sure that, these brands are compliant. They are who they say they are. They are selling what they say they're selling. And so with that, that's the presentation. I hope you learned some things, or at least, had some of your thoughts validated. But I'm very social. I'm all over the internet. My name is Shayda Torabi. If you want to go find me on any of my social platforms, shoot me an email. I'm always happy to talk. And if you like this conversation and want more cannabis marketing, I encourage you to tune into my podcast, To Be Blunt Pod. I'm on Spotify, podcast, iTunes, all the great platforms. And I talk about cannabis and marketing every Monday with a new episode.
Thank you so very much. I have a special guest with us. She's been host at times, co-host, a moderator with CANNA World. And that is Miss Tasha Jackson. And she happens to have a question or two for you. Tasha, would you like to join in?
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to just speak to the social media compliance because this past week, I had some really severe issues. And so I cannot highlight enough, and I can't say enough that it's very difficult to be compliant. I did a bunch of research, and basically anything that's not FDA regulated is frowned upon, whether it is legal or not. And they don't always just shut your account down right away. And they also don't give you warnings, and they also hide your flags. So I want to point that out to the audience, that what I experienced just last week, again, I'm very careful about how I curate things or how things look. And what I found was they start very slowly taking things away. So Business Suite was gone, and I was like, that's interesting. and the ability to invite people from your personal profile from that page is gone. So they very, very slowly start taking things away. So if you jump on and you notice that you have limited functionality, or that you're losing functionality, that's what's happening to you. And unless you go into the dungeon of your account, that is how you will know that your account is on restriction or has been flagged. So I just wanted to bring that up. And thank you so much for all of the great information that you gave, because I don't think that, like you said, there's a lot of gray area. So um, I have another business where I do social media marketing and I manage people's accounts, and I also post things on my business account. And so there's one, client that I had on there, and she sells CBD coffee. And then she was like, free pre rolls with a bag of coffee. And then she has like pre rolls falling. And that was totally fine. But as soon as I posted a commercial that had, the text had nothing to do with cannabis or CBD. It didn't have any images inside. There was nothing. Like, it had no. I was using all of the kinds of, plant medicine, and, not making any kind of medical claims or anything. It was literally like, hey, go check out this video. They cut it. They wouldn't even post it. I can't even upload videos anymore to another business profile that I post to. So again, being in compliance on social media is incredibly difficult, and I would urge everyone to always have a backup plan, because they also, I did create a workaround account and they shut that down without warning. So, again, I think it's important that people understand, because you invest a lot of time. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of energy to make sure that you're wording things the right way, because at the same time, you also still have to continue to do the marketing piece, right? And so you're like, how can I be creative about how can I describe cannabis without describing cannabis, so that the post doesn't get flagged or my account doesn't get flagged? And so again, I really would urge people to consider alternative options. Social media should not be, and this is my opinion, maybe Shayda, you have a different opinion. Social media should not be your number one strategy to reach your customer base. So you please add to that if you feel that statement is appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I was leading with your website as your number one real estate. First off, I'm really sorry that that happened to you, but unfortunately, just like everybody else in this industry, that it's just kind of par for the course. Again, knock on wood, there's certainly been, I've had violations. I have had my account shut down, any of the properties that I operate online, but of course, absolutely have friends and hear stories every day of people that's not the case. And they're often very similar to yours, where I did everything right. I read the blog post. I listened to the podcast. I checked out the, conference presenters, whatever notes, and then following things verbatim sometimes doesn't always net you a better experience on these platforms. So I agree with you. I wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket, especially with social media. And so that's why I think if you're not investing in your website where you can post blogs, where you can put video content, where you can put video and photo content, that's a miss to me, because Google loves to scrape websites, and SEO is really impactful when it comes to how you show up in search rankings. So I would encourage you to invest in kind of that avenue. And then also kind of how I was like wrapping the presentation up with, cannabis, in my opinion, for better or worse, has become really localized until we have federal regulation and federal access to all the plant, which I think will open up a whole other door of challenges, because I don't know if I love interstate commerce. That just seems really scary for me with cannabis, my own personal 2 cents. But you look at kind of how you can't really ship across state lines. You are having to be more localized. And so that's a blessing then. Participate in local events, participate in local radio stations. I get calls all the time from our local, like KISS FM station, our local pop station, saying, oh, do you want to advertise? iHeartMedia now opens up advertising to cannabis. I get calls from my local station, Fox, CBS, ABC channels. They're saying, hey, do you want to come advertise in the local TV? It's going to cost you money to advertise on these platforms. I didn't touch on it, but I'm a really big fan of, more like earned media versus paid media. I don't personally love to do paid media, but there is something with paid media that can ultimately, light your product or your message or your brand on fire and extend you to more people. But I'm a former corporate marketer, and so I have found that doing some more guerrilla marketing has netted me more goodwill, and that's just getting other people to write about me, getting on other people's podcasts, being my own podcast host. Like, these don't have any compliance issues, and so those to me are better spends of my time to go be a guest on a podcast or on a show, or getting featured in like, we have a Texas Hemp Reporter magazine. They just did a feature on us for free. It was an editorial piece that we earned because we're a top rated CBD brand in Central Texas. And so those are efforts that I personally invest in versus social media. But because I'm digital, and like I highlighted, I'm a little bit more bullish, I'm going to post pictures of me smoking joints and, eating gummies and putting on topicals and standing in front of plants, because maybe they kick it off, maybe they don't. And we all know that that's kind of the rub. They might or they might not. So I just encourage everybody to stay hopeful. If a door closes, open another door. These regulations are shifting all the time. You just need to kind of stay on top of it and really assess how risky you want to be. What's the reward for that risk?
Thank you so much. We are ready to segue into our final guest for this round of CANNA World Expo. Thank you so much, Shayda, for joining us. It is really has been a pleasure having you on. You are a plethora of information out for everybody out there.
Thank you so much for having me. Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you so much.